of the Israeli-American Council. Stand up, Robert. The American-Israeli Council is a group of Israelis who've moved to America. They've been organized all around the country, and they're a game changer in pro-Israel activity across the country, especially in Boston. Just wait till you see what they're going to do. That's wonderful. I wanted to say another word about Bev. Bev Copeland has worked 24/7 for days and days and days. She did the program, she did the security, she did the food, she did the... Unbelievable. Thank you, Bev. One more thing, Margot Einstein. In case you don't know it, Margot is the spiritual Viagra of Zionism in New England. And she continues to perk us up for years and years, and 100 more to go. On Wednesday evening at 7:30 in Stoughton, Rabbi Hausman, stand up and wave around. He's presenting Frank Gaffney, Michelle Bachman, General Jerry Boykin, Tom Trento in National Security Chaos, 7:30 at his synagogue. Look it up online. Okay. In his book, Death of Reason, scholar Lee Harris explains that we in the West seem unaware that we live in a unique era in which the law of the jungle appears to have been repealed, that we live in a rare time where whole populations refrain from using brute force to solve their conflicts. We are unaware, he says, that we are the products of a specific tradition of upbringing, deliberately aimed at creating people who would behave like ourselves. And we are dangerously mistaken when we think this unique circumstance of ours has become the universal human condition. When we act as though the rest of the world is like us, Lee Harris warns, we are rushing toward our doom. Who, what will the Lord send us to help us see this mistake and make a course change? Ayaan Hirsi Ali, our honoree, lives under a constant threat of death from the pre-modern Islamic world because she emancipated herself from its mental cages and its physical shackles. And then she had the courage to tell us in the West about the world she left behind. It is a world where tribe and clan rule, where women are the property of men, and where authority comes by the power of force, not reason. Hated by many Muslims in the world for the crime of trying to free them from their own bonds, she is also hated by progressives in the West because she and her life give the lie to their foolish, narcissistic dream that everyone is just like us, wants just what we want, and acts rationally, and has long ago left brutish cruelty behind. To counter this fantasy with her own life story, to express her own truth to Western elites, she has learned, is tantamount to a thought crime. Ayaan grew up in Somalia and Kenya and Saudi Arabia in the Muslim world, and she may be the world's best witness to the law of kill or be killed, you're with us or against us, reason be damned, that the ways of pre-modern tribes and clans lives on in many parts of the world, and this tribal reality is not easily changed by Western reason. Born to a Muslim family in Somalia where she tried to live the life of a good Muslim girl, Ayaan came to know that there was something terribly wrong. You must read her book about her awakening, and in her classic book, Infidel. You must. It will haunt you for the rest of your lives. It may be the most important book of our time. Before her rebellion, which was prompted by the cruelty she experienced and she witnessed, she wore the hijab, she prayed daily, and she studied with Islamic teachers, one of whom told her, Ayaan writes in her book, the Jews had horns and devils literally flew out of their heads to mislead Muslims and spread evil. Everything that went wrong was the fault of the Jews. If only the Jews were destroyed, there would be peace for Muslims, unquote. Nice. It was in 1992 when her beloved father arranged a marriage for her to an unknown and distant relative that Ayaan bolted, fled to Holland, where she learned to love the freedoms of the West, and it's a long, thrilling story where she was elected to the Dutch Parliament. She met there in Holland Theo van Gogh, a descendant of Vincent van Gogh's brother, and together they made a film, Submission Part 1, which depicted Muslim women crying out to Allah, protesting their cruel Islamic lives. For this, Theo was murdered by a jihadist who stabbed him to death in broad daylight and left pinned with a knife in his chest, a death threat to Ayaan and a warning to the world's Jews. At some point, the Dutch decided they could no longer protect Ayaan, and she fled to the United States and now lives here under guard, as you can see. In May 2006, while she was still under the protection of the Dutch security, I arranged with some Dutch students at Harvard to bring Ayaan there for a panel. I will never forget seeing her surrounded by huge, blonde, armed and serious men here in the Cradle of Liberty, in Harvard Square, with armed guards in Harvard Square, only because she wanted to tell us that the pre-modern world still lives and stalks us all. Ayaan's life and her message exposes the savage pre-moderns, yes, but also the modern fools who run our institutions. As we know, 2 years ago, Ayaan was disinvited to Brandeis University, where she was to receive an honorary degree because she would upset both the Muslim organizations and the progressive professors. This disinvitation was a leftist progressive version of the Islamic fatwa. Well, there were no knives and there were no guns. Maybe we could call it a skinny lie. In honoring Ayaan and dishonoring Ayaan, Brandeis, whose motto is, quote, truth even unto its innermost parts, has soiled itself forever.
Right.
Ayaan is a self-made intellectual and has written several books. Literary critic and journalist Christopher Hitchens regarded her as, quote, the most important public intellectual probably ever to come out of Africa. In 2011, she married Scottish intellectual Neil Ferguson, and they have a young son. They live in a secure, undisclosed location. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a woman who risks her life daily so that we can see what is in front of us and so that we can be moved to act. Ladies and gentlemen, please let Ayaan know of your sentiments as we ask her to come forward and accept the Christians and Jews United in Israel 11th Annual Award. At Hanukkah, we Jews sing a song, Dayenu, about being grateful to God for all the gifts that He gave us.
Passover. At Passover.
Passover. I'm allowed to say, okay. Dayenu means it would have been enough. It would have been enough, oh Lord, had you just taken out of slavery. Enough if you had provided us with food in the desert. Enough if you gave us the Torah. If God only had given us one of these gifts, it would have been enough. Today we give you the Genesis Award as a token of our gratefulness, and we say, Dayenu. It would have been enough, Ayaan, had you only emancipated yourself from the mental cage. It would have been enough if you only fled to Holland to tell the world about the world you came from. It would have been enough if you made Submission Part 1 to teach Muslim women how to protest. Ayaan, it would have been enough had you stopped when they threatened your life. But you did not stop. And here before us, we have the true heroine of the Muslim world, and the hopeful Savior of the West. Please accept this gift.
The last time I was in a gathering where Charles was and Ray was, I don't know if you can hear me. I didn't get, is that better? Yeah. Okay, so the last time I was here, it was at the waterfront. It was to the day, so October 30th, 2014, when the IDF, it was an event, and I wonder how many of you were there. But yeah, great. When the IDF were recognized in Boston, and I remember coming with my husband, and we were confronted with huge banners comparing Israel to Hitler, to Germany's Hitler, comparing the IDF to the SS Army. And I still, that sense of disgust is still with me. I am happy to be here under completely different circumstances. There wasn't a single protest outside today. And in a gloomy world, maybe these are the small things that we need to celebrate. I want to thank Charles Jacobs and Ray. Charles, we have a long relationship from the time you brought me to Harvard until now. We run into one another in all kinds of events where Americans, Europeans are trying to wake their fellow Americans up and their fellow Europeans up into understanding the nature of this particular threat, the nature of today. And I'm ashamed to say that it emanates from the religion of my father and mother. Pray, you and Jean and Rachel, we have become very good friends over time. My son Thomas, who's only 4, thinks of Jean, Ray's wife, as his best friend. And I'm really grateful for that sense of community that we've had together. I also want to thank the Christians and Jews for Israel for giving me this award. I am truly humbled and I'm honored. But the first thing that I ask myself is, do I really deserve it? And I know that a lot of people think, oh, come on, stop that false modesty. But in my case, it is not false modesty. There was a time when I used to hate Jews. I just want you to contemplate that. Without ever having met a Jew, without ever having been to Israel, I used to hate with a great deal of passion Jews. And I expressed that hatred in thought, I expressed it in prayer. I thought, I was convinced as a teenager, maybe even younger than as a teenager, and in my young adult years, that Jews were responsible for everything that went wrong in my life. Everything that went wrong in my family's life, in my community's life, in my country's life, in my continent's life. I held Jews responsible for everything that went wrong in the world. If I failed an exam, there was a Jewish hand in it. When we had no water, no electricity, it was up to some Jewish plot. The news, growing up in Somalia, and Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia and Kenya, the news is full of bad stuff. Nations that fail, people that get killed, all kinds of conflict, human conflict. I held Jews responsible for that. And very intimately, I prayed that Jews be destroyed before they destroy us. Now you're going to ask yourself, how does a child, a 10-year-old child, a 13-year-old child, a 15-year-old child, how do they get to this? How did I get to this place where I held Jews responsible for everything bad, everything that went wrong? I don't want to say that Jews were human, because in that young mind, in that teenage mind of mine, in that young adult mind of mine, Jews were thoroughly dehumanized. I was 23 years old when I saw the first Jew in my life. I was in Antwerp. I was living in an asylum seeker center in the Netherlands, and we went on a trip to Antwerp, Belgium. And the guy who was taking us around said, "This is the Jewish neighborhood." And I remember shrieking, "Jewish neighborhood? Where? Where is the Jew?" And he pointed to a family that to you will seem familiar. The family with the locks around their ears. And I remember looking at that family, looking at the man, looking at the young boys, and thinking, but they're human. I mean, they are people. What did I expect to see? Maybe something from Star Wars. Monsters, serpents, vermin, like rats and cockroaches. That's what I expected to see. And when I reflect on that, and when I see the anti-Semitism we see today, because it continues, that anti-Semitism, maybe now not under the banner of some European radical group, but under the banner of the religion of my father and my mother. That's what's taught to us. And the question is, how did I get to believe these things? Because it was inculcated into me through my faith at home, in the mosque, in my neighborhood. That's how I was made to feel that everything that went wrong in our lives, the Jews were responsible. It had a function for us, but I'm telling you this only as a grown-up and only in reflection, only in hindsight. We didn't have to deal with our problems. We didn't have to bother with finding solutions for them. As long as we could blame the Jews, we could stay united, whatever united meant. This is a community of Christians and Jews united for Israel. So some of you might ask, but what about the Christians? When I was a child, when I was a teenager, when I was a young adult, what did I think of the Christians? I wasn't taught to hate the Christians. I was taught that Christians and Jews take each other as friends, but I wasn't taught to hate Christians. I was taught that Christians were lost. Poor them. They got confused about what happened to Jesus Christ. He didn't die at the cross. He was, this is the Islamic version of things. He was taken off the cross. And those who were trying to crucify him were blinded by the power of God. And Jesus, at the end of days, is going to come back. That's what I was taught. So my duty as a young child, practicing my faith, was to tell these poor Christians about their confusion and to lead them back to the straight path. That's what I was taught about Christians. And that today is what is taught to millions and millions of children across the world about Christians. In the period that I was growing up, I remember annoying my classmates and telling them to convert to Islam, even though they were not only Christian, but also very passionate about their Christianity. Things have gotten worse. I'm talking about the 1980s and the 1990s. Things have gotten worse for Christians in Muslim-majority countries. Now, Muslim children and Muslim youth are not only sent to convert Christians to Islam, they are sent to disrupt Christian life, disrupt communities that gather at churches, at weddings. They're subjected to blasphemy laws. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but in many countries, and I think Pakistan is the most prominent because it's the most headline-grabbing country at the moment, they have blasphemy laws that if you reject Islam in this country, then you're blaspheming. So how can you be a Christian community or a Jewish community or even a Muslim minority community if the law books dictate that practicing your own faith is blasphemy? These are things that we don't talk about in the United States of America, and even less in Europe. On my way here today, I was asked by Rin, can you please tell us what it is that you admire about Israel? I used to hate Jews. I used to hate the state of Israel even more, but I have evolved. I'm different now, and I've come to love Israel. And most of my friends, my best friends, are Jewish. What is it that I love about Israel? There's so much. It's a successful nation state. It is a success. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. People are entrepreneurial. There's so much to love about it. But I want to share 3 things with you that I think are so important that we can and do need to learn from Israel. First of all, what appeals to me the most in my evolved self is that Israel and the leaders of Israel chose life over death. The second point is that those same leaders chose liberty over authoritarianism. And the third point is that they chose a healthy attitude to nationalism and a healthy attitude to the place of faith in that nation state. These 3 factors are key in the world that we live in. I stand before you now having said no to hate, no to victimhood. I don't want to blame Jews for what goes wrong in my personal life, in my family, in my community, in my country. I want to figure out what on earth it is that is wrong so that I can fix it. And to be interested in fixing your life is to be interested in life. And so I relate, and it speaks to me that a people, the Jewish people who were subjected to the Holocaust, came out of that trauma and decided to build a place to find a home for the Jewish people. Those Jewish leaders in 1948, they could have told all Jewish little boys and all Jewish little girls, you and your ancestors have been wronged. You've been subjected to the worst kind of prejudice. Dedicate your lives to forever annihilating the Germans or the Europeans or the Arabs. They had that choice. They didn't go there. Instead, they decided to find a home and to teach their children to believe in life, life now, life on earth, a problem-solving approach to life, and to do that as a community. And that shared experience of pain, that was transformed to create a vibrant nation of life. I love Israel because it is showing humanity how that can be done. You can choose for revenge, you can choose for destruction. As human beings, it's in us, it's in each one of us. But you can also choose to move forward. And in doing so, you don't have to forget the history of how that all came about. But the function of that history is different. Liberty over authoritarianism. It was so much easier. This is late 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s. So many countries and so many people who were subjected to colonialism were emerging out of that. So many nation states were being formed. It was so easy. It must have been so tempting for those people who founded Israel to go down the path of authoritarianism. Israel could have been a Singapore. Israel could have been a Senegal. Israel could have been a North Korea. Israel could have been a Kuwait or a Lebanon or a Jordan or a Syria. But those leaders decided that they wanted to take a chance on democracy, on allowing the people of that nation state to take a part in their own destiny. And in that sense, Israel is obviously not perfect. I've never argued that a nation state is perfect. But it is an example to the rest of the world, and to the rest of the leaders trying now to figure out how to improve on nation states and how to found new ones, that liberty, democracy, the rule of law, and the institutions that safeguard the freedoms and the equalities and the dignity of human beings are far superior to the tempting but weak, ultimately weak and hollow approach of authoritarianism. And Israel is built on a nationalism, as all nations have to figure out what is it when you bring all these people from, remember in 1948 people were coming from everywhere, from Europe, from Africa, from North Africa, obviously a part of Africa. But people were coming into Israel from absolutely everywhere. What is it that you give them that tells you that these people are connected? It's their identity, and it's their faith. And what Israel has done is it went away from that toxic nationalism that brought Germany down. Toxic nationalism that infected many of these European countries. France, I lived in the Netherlands, it was there. Traces of that are still in Europe. So moved away from toxic nationalism and embraced a healthy nationalism and a healthy approach to faith. And giving the people of faith a place in that nation state. And when I say healthy, to me what is unhealthy is fanaticism. And what really is amazing about Israel is that the fanatics of Israel have a home and a place in Israel. But they're not the leaders. They don't shape the future of Israel. Tell me of a nation state that has found that balance, that healthy nationalism and that healthy attitude toward faith. Look at the neighbors of Israel. Saudi Arabia, it's the fanatics. Iran, it's the fanatics who are in control. And all around Syria, Jordan, Egypt, every time that nationalism, Arab nationalism or Egyptian nationalism, Nasserism, whatever you want to call it, when that pops up its head, it is unhealthy, it's exclusionary, it's authoritarian, the strong man. So there's so much to admire and love about Israel. There's so much to love and admire about Israel and so much to learn from. If you not only look at Israel, what Israel got right, but if you also look around Israel's neighbors and what they got wrong. Look at the leadership of the Palestinians and how they embraced death over life and vengeance and resentfulness over moving forward and over optimism. Little boys and little girls as young as 2 and 3 and 4 are taught that their role models, the heroes, are martyrs. That the best thing that they can achieve in life is to kill a Jew. What kind of leadership is that? And what kind of choice is that? Don't you pity the children of Palestine? I do. I don't condemn them because I was that child who was taught to hate, who was taught about martyrdom. That is what the Palestinian leaders have chosen for. There are exceptions, individuals, organizations, and maybe now even some national leaders. There are exceptions, and we ought to invest in those exceptions. We ought to believe in those exceptions. But in general, on the individual level, on the group level, and on the nation-state level, Israel's neighbors have made that choice of death over life, of authoritarianism over liberty, of a very toxic nationalism, and of fanaticism. The entire opposition to these authoritarians is to read the Holy Quran and find in there scriptures of hate. I'm asked all the time, what is it that we can learn from Israel? And I point to the 3 key aspects that I gave you. Why is a healthy nationalism a lesson? Look at Europe. I served in the Dutch Parliament. My job was to figure out with my fellow parliamentarians how to integrate people who are coming from Africa, Asia, the Middle East into Dutch society. To me, as a relative newcomer, what I thought was great about Dutch nationality, Dutch nationalism, the nation of Holland, it was obvious to me. Freedom, equality, prosperity, but it wasn't obvious to them. When I came to America, and I was at the American Enterprise Institute, and we were discussing this large demographic, growing demographic of people coming from countries and nations and populations that are unfree, I asked a German journalist, in order to integrate newcomers into Germany, what is it about national identity, your German national identity, that we value? He said, there's no German identity. We eat sausages and we drink beer. For that journalist with a very renowned paper, his national identity in the 21st century was about eating sausages and drinking beer. That was what he reduced German national identity to. Now, are you surprised, ladies and gentlemen, if forces that have a completely different attitude to that just come and take over the place? I know you are not surprised. I know that the people in this room are not surprised. But I also don't want you to be complacent and to think that this is only things that happen far away, as in Europe. Here in the United States, on our own campuses, there are movements that are trying to review, is the word, but pretty much to erase the history of America. People like Thomas Jefferson are no longer heroes. They are no longer the founding fathers. In the new narrative, on some of these campuses, they are slaveholders, akin to Hitler. There is nothing for the average American student going to an American campus to be proud of as an American. And I find that incredibly sad, tragic, dangerous, not just for America, but for the whole world. If you don't develop, as Israel has done, this healthy approach to national identity, then our nation states are committing, the nation states of the liberal West are committing suicide. And I know from my experience as a young child that if that happens, if Western civilization is erased, then women, girls, homosexuals, religious minorities, Jews will be subject to a doctrine and doctrines, ideologies that completely deny us our rights and that take us to a place of barbarism. I want to leave you with a note of hope. I have to run to the airport and I don't know how long I have spoken, but I want to leave you with a note of hope. There are individuals, I'm not the only one, who are born into Muslim households, who are standing up to the narrative of jihad, the narrative of Sharia. There is an emerging group of Muslims who say openly that they are friends and admirers of Israel. I know that the figure, the current Pope, is a disappointment, that he cares more about global warming than his core mission. But there are Muslims emerging who are saying and who are bringing into the open what happens to Christians in Muslim countries. There are more and more Muslims and ex-Muslims who not only embrace but also want to promote the ideas of the Enlightenment. That is the hope that I want to leave you with. And with our current president, President Obama, who made this incredible deal with Iran, that most of us think, ouch. There was, and it was ouch, and it is ouch. But here's an unintended consequence. He has now driven the Arabs into the arms of Israel. Because if these Arab nations want to survive, they are going to rely on Israeli power to protect them from Iran. Wow. There are slivers of hope out there. It is not a solution. But I think what makes the people of Israel unique and the Jewish people unique is even in moments when everything looks so dark and so gloomy, when it looks like it's the end of the world, you always look for signs of hope. And when you ask me, what are these signs of hope? I'm seeing individuals, I'm seeing groups, and I'm seeing leaders of nation states who are doing things that could make a difference. And I want to thank once again CJUI for recognizing these slivers of hope and for urging you and the broader audiences to invest in these slivers of hope. Thank you so much.
Ayaan has agreed to take some questions from the audience for a few minutes, and then she would like to tell you about her current work with her own foundation. So if you want to raise your hand, Larry, you have a mic? Yeah? Yes, sir.
Before we start the questions,
Thank you.
Before we start the
yes.
questions, let it be a question and not a statement. We have very, very limited time, so we would like to get as many questions as possible. So let it be a question and not a statement.
Thank you. Ayaan, can the Muslim faith be separated from Sharia law? Can you be a faithful Muslim without believing in Sharia law? And can the Muslim faith integrate into the United States secular law?
Can the Muslim faith, can Islam be reformed? In other words, can it be changed? Yeah, and can you be a believing, practicing Muslim and at the same time ignore Sharia? I think it's the question of the day. And quite honestly, I do not think that we can edit or rewrite the Holy Quran. It's not what I'm proposing. I don't, the figure Muhammad, for as long, people say he didn't exist, maybe he did, it doesn't matter. For 1.5 billion people, 1/5 of humanity, he did exist, and he is a leading example. What we are investing in is a change of attitude towards scripture, a change of attitude toward the holy man, and a separation of religion from politics. That's what we're investing in. And if we invest in that, I'm not saying, listen, I have been very explicit in all my work about the contents of the Quran. I've been very explicit about Sharia law. I think Sharia law is the best example of how to violate human rights indefinitely. Can a Muslim believe and practice in human rights and believe and practice in Sharia law? No. What a Muslim can do, though, is change his attitude towards Sharia law and see it as a historic body of law, not something that applies to us today. And that's what we are all fighting for.
I need to apologize. In the audience is Alex Koifman. Stand up. He's the head of the Russian Jewish Foundation, and if you ever wanted more ferocious Zionists in Boston, you couldn't find them. Alex, go ahead and ask your question.
Why do you think the Muslim world is so much more radicalized today than 50 years ago? Should I repeat the question?
Yes.
Why do you think the Muslim world is so much more radicalized today than 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, or 100 years ago? What is happening? And it's only going more radicalized.
Well, there are a number of reasons, but I think the most important reason you have to look for in Saudi Arabia and in Iran and the other oil-rich countries, because these countries invested large amounts of money, national resources, national wealth, in spreading what is the worst about Islam and Islamic history, legacy, civilization, and law. And that's the short answer. The Organization of Islamic Conference, they meet every year, the ministers of foreign affairs, and they talk about da'wah, or the Islamization, not only of Muslim countries, but of the world. In the 1950s, they didn't exist. This organization was founded in 1969. And it seems to me as if they're seeing not only the outcome of their mission in terms of Islamization, but also once Islam as a political doctrine is applied, what it leads to. So yes, you're right, in the 1950s, in the 1940s, and back then, it seemed as if more and more leaders from the Muslim world were accepting modernity and liberty and individual rights and women's rights and religious tolerance. But the response, the reaction to that from the clerics, with countries like Saudi Arabia getting tons of oil money, has led to a reversal in development of these countries. If you look at Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia, Kabul, capital of Afghanistan, Tehran, capital of Iran, Cairo, capital of Egypt, you look at pictures from the 1950s, you'll be stunned at how much they resemble many of the Western capitals. You look now, you see men and women separated, women veiled, and you see how backward things have gone. Again, some of these countries, starting with Saudi Arabia, this new young prince with this little plan of his, he's saying now that he wants Saudi Arabia to be a hub to develop the economy and the education and all of that. They're jealous of Israel. They want to be like Israel. But the first and foremost thing he has to do is he has to close the financial tap that is now at the behest of the clergymen.
Well, one sec, I called on her, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. You're an inspiration to us all. But this goes along with what you've just talked about. But could you talk about, and you've alluded to it, the relationship between globalism and the rise of jihad?
Yeah, globalism and the rise of jihad. I wish I had more time. So when we discuss globalism on campus, I work in academia. What I find surprising is that we always focus and limit ourselves only to economic globalization. Oh, I can sell you these goods, or I can buy your goods, or I can take your manufacturing, or I can, all of these. So globalization then becomes, if you only limit it to economic, the economic sphere, it becomes only just material. What we then overlook is that globalization, it's not only goods that cross borders. It's people, it's ideas. So if you, in 1985, the United States, women in the United States, presidential candidate Hillary Clinton was in Beijing promoting the rights of women, back then nobody thought that the idea of jihad and the idea of Sharia, the idea of commanding right and forbidding wrong, would also cross borders. And that the minute that European and Western nations started to digest this idea that because they were imperial nations, that they forever have to ask for forgiveness for what they did in the past. The minute that idea crossed borders, what we are seeing now is